welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores!
Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks.
Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick lays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for Wednesday, March the 1st. February is gone. Let the madness begin. March Madness getting underway today in Greenville with the women's basketball tournament. In the early game, looked like Texas A&M was going to take down Vanderbilt. And so there is another game to come in what I call the play-in games for the SEC women's tournament. All right, couple of news and notes yesterday. Gamecock baseball remains perfect, 9-0. They will enter the Clemson series undefeated after a 10-5 victory over North Carolina A&T. Gamecocks 9 games in 12 days, getting it done yesterday with timely hitting, good starting pitching, and the bullpen getting it done. All right, last night at the Hump in Stark, Vegas, Gamecock men's basketball, just not enough. They drop a 74-68 decision to Mississippi State. Gamecocks played fairly well. I didn't get to see it. I was on the diamond calling baseball games last night. Hayden Brown, he had 12 points on 5 of 12 from the field, 0 of 4 from 3. Gamecocks just did not shoot it good enough from deep, just 6 of 20 on the game. G.G. Jackson led all scorers with 22 points, 5 of 12 from the field, just 1 of 4 from deep, but 11 of 11 from the free throw line, 8 rebounds in 33 minutes. Certainly nothing wrong with him. The problem was your starting backcourt just got smothered and couldn't get it done. Michi Johnson, just 2 of 8. Both of those from downtown, 2 of 5. He only had 6 points, no free throw attempts. Jacoby Wright, just 8 points on 3 of 7 from the field and 1 of 3 from deep, 1 of 2 from the free throw line. Josh Gray, the big fella, 5 of 7 from the field, 2 of 2 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds, 12 points, and 2 assists in just 22 minutes. So you had your front line playing pretty well, but your starting backcourt just couldn't get untracked. And as we know, for South Carolina to stay competitive in these games, their starting backcourt, I mean, those guys have got to be in, scoring 16 plus points per game each. That was not the case last night, Shaquille Moore, he led the Bulldogs with 20 points. Tolu Smith, the big fella, he had 16 points and 6 rebounds for the Bulldogs. And then Sean Jones Jr. off the bench with 11 points. So they had 3 players in double figures as well. So this season is winding on down. So it's Gamecocks and Tigers in baseball this weekend, Friday night at Clemson. It could be a long night. Weather is in the forecast. You could have a delayed game. Honestly, I could see this. If it's a rain out, you play a day-night doubleheader. You play an early game in Clemson. You move the Saturday game at Fluor Field to a night game, and then you wrap it up in Sunday. That would certainly allow for more Gamecocks to buy a ticket and go over to the Well and watch the Gamecock women's basketball, hopefully, in the semifinals of the SEC tournament. So the top 4 seeds get the double bye. South Carolina, number 1. LSU, number 2. Tennessee, number 3. And then Ole Miss, number 4. They won't play until Friday. You got one more play-in today, and then you'll have a full slate of games. You'll have 2 games in the early session, 2 games in the night session there in Greenville. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, Emily Adams from the Greenville News should be joining us. And so we will look forward to catching up with her. And then we've got TMIek Uva from Gamecock Central.com. He is also coming up to preview spring practice a little bit in the second half of the show, and then we'll talk a little bit of women's basketball. So let's pay some bills here, and we'll be right back right after this message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the Free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and TMIek Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter @KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter @GamecockPod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/GamecockPodDaily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, we are back, and let's welcome in our first guest on today's show, and that is Emily Adams, who probably does the best job on the beat covering Gamecock women's basketball. Emily, how are you? And hopefully the heartbreak from the Super Bowl has subsided a little bit. I know it's got a sting, but welcome back into the show. Great to have you on Gamecock Pod Live here today on a Wednesday.
I know, yeah, excited to be making my live debut today. I'm slowly recovering from the Super Bowl. I don't know. I'm still not over the 2005 Super Bowl, so I don't know that this one will be any quicker. But yeah, still haven't had to cover a loss yet this season for basketball, so that's getting me through right now.
No doubt. So Clint says it looks like Emily might be from the state of Pennsylvania. Clint, you are correct. She is a proud Philly girl, just like another Philly girl who is on the brink of a season of perfection. And so, Emily, let's dive right in. What was the scene like at another sold-out Colonial Life Arena in what I think was probably has to be the most emotional senior day for Dawn Staley and for her program, especially since they've been winning so big. I mean, a historic class. I think they're now 121-8. And had it not been for COVID, I mean, let's think about this, okay? When the freshies were freshmen, they had one loss, and that was in like November to Indiana. They ran the table and blew everybody out in the SEC tournament. They were primed to win a national championship that year with the senior leadership of Ty Harris and Kiki Herbert-Harrigan. Robbed by COVID. Okay, yeah. The next year they're in the Final Four in San Antonio, and they missed 2 layups in the last 5 seconds that could have propelled them in the national championship game. Last year, they secured the bag. They took down Gino, Ariema, and UConn. Now, they've done something they've never done before, and that is have an undefeated regular season 9 games away, Emily, from a season of perfection and becoming the first team since 2016 to go undefeated on their way to the NCAA national championship.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think, I actually talked to Ty Harris a little bit last week for a little story that I did for senior day. And she said something very similar, just kind of that losing that championship in 2020 when, I think they were the clear favorites and they knew that. And I think, Ty and Kiki wanted to have that kind of bookend moment from, starting with that 2017 team that won the first one to, ending it on a championship. And Ty talked a little bit about just how much losing that has motivated this group who were then freshmen and are now seniors and now really have the chance to do what Ty and Kiki didn't get the chance to do and bookend their career with the championship and win 2 championships in their careers. It's something that no South Carolina class has ever done before. Dawn said it earlier this year. If Aliyah brings us home a second title, she'll be in a league of her own. And I think she really means that. I mean, that is the only thing this team has talked about the entire season. And I mean, speaking of the scene on senior day, that was really, for me, the first time we've seen them show any emotion almost. It has just been so businesslike and so on to the next game in a way that doesn't feel contrived and coach speaky. Like, I really think they are very genuine in that, which is really unusual and something I generally don't buy into. Like, I think most teams look at a game like UConn and look at a game like LSU and do take those more seriously. And I really don't think this team did. I asked Leah after that LSU game, you guys have said it's next game. Does it feel more significant now afterwards, having beaten them by that much? And she said, And I really think that kind of captures the way that this senior class is viewing this. Nothing until that championship is going to rattle them or phase them or feel important to them. That is the only thing I think they care about. And I would be surprised at this point not to see them get there. I think, yeah, something would have to go very, very wrong at this stage.
All right, so Asia Wilson never lost an SEC tournament game. 4 straight tournament championships. One year, that I think her senior year, they didn't win the regular season. Mississippi State did. Then they took them out in Greenville to capture the title. Aliyah Boston won't have 4 SEC tournament championships, but I think she'll take the one that's going to come the first weekend in April on a Sunday night in Dallas and give her 2 national championships and 3 SEC championships and a season of perfection. All that is on the line. So the tournament's already underway. I guess one of the early games is over. Texas A&M top. Well, they were up on Vanderbilt, and Texas A&M gets the win 77-70. Kentucky and Florida on tap to get underway in about 14 minutes. But the tournament really starts tomorrow, and quite frankly, it really doesn't start until Friday because that's when the top teams play, and that's really chalk. And so to me, the most intriguing game for Saturday would be number 2 LSU and number 3 Tennessee if chalk prevails. The Vols are playing their way potentially into a top 16 seed.
Yeah.
LSU's been really good all year, but I think they struggled to beat Tennessee in Baton Rouge. And man, I just love the way Rakia Jackson is playing. She was certainly worthy of first team all SEC. And so a couple storylines developing, in my opinion. Tennessee, LSU, Knoxville, 3 hours away. A large contingent of Lady Vol fans, I believe, will be there on Saturday to support their team. And then on Sunday, you could have a rematch, South Carolina and Tennessee, or South Carolina and LSU. And quite frankly, if I was Aliyah Boston after I just boat raced the only other undefeated team in the country at the time and ranked number 2 in one poll and 3 in the other by 24, and if we'd have just hit a few free throws, we would have won by 30, I would have probably said, just like her. Look, we all know I'm a famous, notorious Kim Mulkey insulter, but give the stripper her due. She can definitely coach the game of basketball. I would expect a rematch to be different, to be closer. How do you see the SEC tournament playing out? Who's a dark horse, and maybe what, in your opinion, are the most intriguing 1 or 2 matchups that are really going to help determine the SEC champion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a little content plug here. Myself, our Tennessee beat writer, Cora Hall, and our LSU beat writer, Corey Diaz, all picked every game of the tournament. We kind of just went through and projected how things are going to go. So you can find that on greenvilleonline.com. But my dark horse is Georgia, and you'll see that in those predictions. I picked Georgia to upset LSU in their first game out.
Ooh.
I really, really like the way that Georgia has handled itself in big games. I think they're incredibly well coached for a first-year head coach, and I'm someone who believes heavily that coaching is the biggest difference maker in postseason play. I mean, look at that Vanderbilt A&M game that's just ended here. I mean, Joni Taylor is a phenomenal coach, and her team has not had a good year, and they did not have a good time the first time they played Vanderbilt, and they came back and really handled them today for most of that game. Georgia went to overtime with LSU in the regular season. Georgia's defense has has handled South Carolina very well. Yeah, I mean, both of those games were closer than they should have been, especially that one in Athens was almost down to the wire there at the end. And that's a team that I really would not be surprised to see show up in a big way in the postseason. And I think especially with LSU's record in the postseason, I mean, last year they were upset by that Kentucky team that went on to win it all last year in their first game out. And then they went to the tournament, were upset in the second round. So, it wouldn't surprise me to see LSU stumble, especially just with the schedule that they've played. They have not been sort of put through the ringer of a tournament type environment. They had buys in the SEC after playing South Carolina and after playing Tennessee, or before playing South Carolina, before playing Tennessee. So they have not faced that sort of grueling tournament style, big game after big game situation this season. And I feel like South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia even are all more prepared to handle that sort of situation. I mean, Tennessee especially has practically played the NCAA tournament already with their non-conference schedule. So, I think that will set them up really well at this point in the season. They've been playing much better, over the last month, even than they were in January. I thought they looked really good against South Carolina, especially that first half. That to me was a show of what their potential can be. The thing that concerns me with Tennessee is just that they have not been able to sort of sustain that. And so a matchup with LSU, a rematch with Tennessee and LSU, honestly would be one of the most interesting matches of the tournament for me. I didn't pick it to happen, but I would love to see it. I think that's a must-watch game. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be physical and mean because there is, now beef between those two teams. That was the game where Angel Reese put her little finger-licking thing out that's now kind of blown up. So I think that would be a really fun matchup to see again. So that's the big one. And then honestly, I don't know that South Carolina is scared to see either of them. If I'm South Carolina, I would much rather see LSU. Frankly, I think that's a better matchup for them just because LSU does the same things well that South Carolina does. And they proved already that they can handle Reese. They can handle, if they let Morris get going and contain Reese, they're going to win by double digits. Tennessee, I think, is a little scarier because Tennessee has that outside shooting potential that really almost got South Carolina in trouble even in the fourth quarter of that Tennessee game. If Caroline Strickland and Tess Darby get going and start hitting threes, that's when South Carolina is going to find themselves in a hole. So I think that in a championship game, I'm still picking South Carolina to win, obviously, but I think Tennessee is a much scarier opponent to them in that championship than LSU would be.
I mean, I can't dispute that because I think the Vols would travel down. I mean, the wagons, the moonshine, the straw hats. I mean, clearly there would be more people than teeth in the arena in the Tennessee section. Sorry, I know you used to work up there. I'm not a fan of the Hillbillies. All right.
I will say, I mean, that would be a fun championship matchup with College Game Day coming as well, because I think both of those teams, I mean, LSU honestly traveled pretty well when they played at South Carolina, but at the end of the day, that is a very long trip. I think you're going to see much better turnout if it ends up being South Carolina, Tennessee, and obviously, the FAMs travel very, very well, especially just up to Greenville. So that'll really be a home environment for South Carolina, I think, through a lot of the tournament. But yeah, to have those two programs, to have South Carolina, which is, sort of the up and comer up against Tennessee, which has all of that historical success on College Game Day, the first time they've ever done a conference championship weekend, I think that would be certainly interesting to see and certainly interesting for ESPN. I think they would probably prefer to see that one as well.
I agree, because then you would have at that point, the past and the present greatness from the SEC. And so South Carolina now 36 weeks atop, consecutive weeks atop the AP poll that ties them with Louisiana Tech. I'm assuming there'll be one more prior to the NCAA tournament, which if South Carolina rolls, that would put them at 37 consecutive weeks, which would put them all alone. UConn has the record at 51 weeks. I mean, you got to give Gino his due on that. I mean, they at one point had won 112 games in a row, and he had built a dynasty. 11 national championships.
Yeah.
But in the context of the Southeastern Conference, not even Pat Summitt's teams maintained pole position in the AP poll as long as South Carolina has. And so, looking into your crystal ball a month from now, what is the legacy of Dawn Staley and Aliyah Boston like if South Carolina secures the bag and completes the season of perfection?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate what a big deal that is to accomplish. It's something, I looked through the past champions a couple weeks ago, just looking for how many times it's happened. There's 4 programs ever that have had an undefeated season, and UConn has 6 of them. No one else has more than one. And Kim Mulkey has one of those from her time at Baylor. Pat Summitt has one at Tennessee, and then Texas has one from back in the day. But I mean, it's just such an incredibly rare accomplishment. And I think, it's even rarer now just because of the way that women's basketball has grown over the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, the level of talent, and I think we've seen that all year, is so elevated. The depth of teams that are competitive is so much higher than it was, back in the days when UConn was dominating. I think there's just a different caliber of coaching as well. I think, there are better coaches getting in, the training is better, the access is better, the resources are better. Women's basketball has developed so much that I think it is so much harder to win this consistently in this era. And I mean, this team has just done it and done it and done it. And, the most impressive thing to me, and I think I've said this a couple of times, is just that they've had really bad games where they've played really poorly and they're still undefeated. They've been really challenged by opponents that weren't supposed to really challenge them. They were really challenged by Kentucky on the road. I think that's easy to forget when you look at that final box score, but they were within a score of Kentucky entering that 4th quarter, and Kentucky's now the 11 seed in the tournament. So, I mean, this team has been put on upset watch before, and they just have consistently delivered when it counts the most. And I think going into, the rigors of tournament season with a roster that's this experienced, with, a head coach that has been through this before, with this very single-minded sort of approach that they've taken to this whole season, I think they are as perfectly primed as a team can be entering a situation like the NCAA tournament to make that happen, to complete the perfect season. We saw last year faltering is not something that's impossible for them. We saw it happen in that championship game against Kentucky in the SEC tournament, but I don't think this year, this senior class is willing to accept anything less than that perfect season. I think they are so comfortable in where they are right now. It's hard to see who could beat them. Even when you look at those top teams in the Big Ten, your Indianas, your Iowas, I watch them and I don't think they scare South Carolina. I mean, I don't see anyone right now who is positioned as a clear team that South Carolina is afraid of. And that's a good place to be in March.
No doubt. So we saw at UConn, point guard Kara Fletcher pulled after 4 minutes. Raven Johnson plays 36 minutes. I thought maybe it was literally no pun intended, that there was getting ready to be a changing of the guard. That has not happened.
Yeah.
And what I've seen in the games since then, and in particular the big games since then, is the same player I saw 2 years ago in the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, who completely outplayed Destiny Henderson in the Sweet 16 game that Georgia Tech just didn't have enough.
Yeah.
Emily, I just don't think people understand the impact, not just of an injury, but of missing an entire season. Like Kara Fletcher did not play all of last season because of her injury. She did not start the preseason with South Carolina this year. When she did start playing, she was on a minutes restriction. She and Raven Johnson both. Now I see that same confident player that can hit the catch and shoot three, that can take you off the dribble, pull up on a dime and hit the mid-range jumper, that's a bulldog on the backboards and is not backing down from anybody, and is also not afraid to get in your face if you get out of line either. And then I just see Raven Johnson continuing to build confidence. Is South Carolina better positioned at point guard this year to go through with now two healthy players, as opposed to minutes when Destiny Henderson was not on the floor last year?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think so. And I think it's just that Fletch and Raven are so different. You know, they play the point guard position in like a completely fundamentally different way. Raven plays so fast and is so flashy and is such a unique passer. You know, I mean, her floor vision is unlike anything I've really seen in a while. It's just so impressive to watch. You know, she sees players that didn't look open to me sitting on the sideline watching, and I mean, we'll just hit them with a dime. And then Fletch has just been so solid and consistent. She is such a game manager. You know, she is just a consistent force of leadership. And I think the other thing with her that's so impressive is just the way that she's integrated into this group as a graduate transfer into a super experienced team that has been together for a very, very long time and just had no problems, really. I mean, she just was a part of it. And I think that's something that's really difficult to do and really speaks to her maturity and also just sort of her likability as part of the team. I mean, you can tell that she is just loved by those girls, and, you know, she's been there for less than a year. And I think that speaks so highly of her. But I think the strength of having both of them be good at such different things is that you have an answer to whatever your opponent is weakest at. You know, that's why we saw Fletch played 4 minutes at UConn, because UConn loves that very, you know, methodical, a little bit slowed down, I think, style, just again, because they're so lacking in depth. Running the floor the way Raven Johnson runs the floor is not an option for them. And so Raven played almost that whole game because that was what that matchup demanded, you know. And then you see Fletch at Tennessee really dominated in the minutes and was such a consistent shooter for them on a night when they weren't shooting great a lot of that game. You know, it gives them such versatility for a team that really is not very versatile overall. You know, this team is a team that plays in the paint. They're a team that plays at the post. They don't have, you know, consistently strong outside shooters. And I think that point guard position is where they've really found the ability to be multiple and flip that switch. And again, that's something that come tournament time, it gives both Fletch and Raven the chance to rest, which is huge. And B, it allows them to cater to matchups, which is a huge part of getting through the NCAA tournament. I mean, that's maybe one of the biggest factors, because that's why you see teams get upset as they pull a bad matchup. And for South Carolina, I don't know that there are many bad matchups because of those two.
All right, so in the latest bracketology from Charlie Cream at ESPN, he has Iowa and Caitlin Clark as the number 2 seed in South Carolina's regional from the Field of Dreams in Iowa, which, by the way, they couldn't get out of a second-round game at home last year.
Yeah.
Okay, she did hit the shot on national TV. It was a big-time shot. Man, and we clearly saw Caitlin Clark loves her some Caitlin Clark. I mean,
and
unbelievable.
honestly, if I were Caitlin Clark, I would too. I mean, I think that's the thing with Iowa. The thing that makes Iowa a little bit scarier this year than they were last year is just Caitlin is better to me. I think she's really taken a step up this year. You know, she's not a defender, but I think she's not a hindrance defensively this year. I think she's, clearly put some effort into that aspect of her game. I think she's just gotten more consistent. She's been so clutch for that team. I mean, just a player who shows up in big moments. And that's, when we're talking about things that you need in the NCAA tournament, that's the textbook right there, is a player like Caitlin Clark. My question with Iowa is just whether they have the depth around her to support that when she's going to have to play 40 minutes in tournament games, so that's what I think makes South Carolina a bad matchup for Iowa. Is Iowa has the shooting around South Carolina. I think that game would be high scoring for sure, but I just don't think they have the depth to keep up.
I think that's the game ESPN wants, because that is clearly the 2 front runners for Player of the Year.
Yeah.
To be determined. Emily, I hope they're putting you up at a nice hotel on the West End. Get some great food. Enjoy my old stomping grounds in Greenville. And we will look forward to catching up with you down the road. Great stuff today. As always, safe travels and be well, my friend.
Thanks so much. Yep, pleasure as always. Glad to be on.
All right. That is Emily Adams. And now we go from beauty to the beast. I kid, Mike Uva. The handsome former anchorman at Watch Fox 57, now the head of digital content at Gamecock Central. Mike, welcome in and welcome to Gamecock Pod Live, streaming on YouTube. How's it going, my friend?
I appreciate it, Keith. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Hey, so we were just talking women's basketball with Emily Adams. You were backstage. You got to hear a little bit of that. We'll get to that, but March is here, and that just doesn't mean the madness. That means spring practice is getting underway for Shane Beamer in 2 weeks. Let's just take a few 30,000-foot snapshots today, and then we'll get into a little more women's basketball at the end of the show. So we are 2 weeks away. South Carolina finished the season, obviously ending Clemson and Tennessee's dreams of the college football playoff. One in dramatic fashion, one in a complete boat racing of Tennessee, and maybe the most shocking game I've ever seen at Williams-Brice Stadium. But first, we got to talk about this guy that, as a track star, the only guy you can compare him to is Usain Bolt, probably faster at age 17 than Bolt. And then as a football player, stature-wise, speed-wise, Megatron, Calvin Johnson, Nyckoles Harbor, you guys were covering that at Gamecock Central. How big, now when February is not the big national signing day, how big was that for Shane Beamer and South Carolina to win the day on the 4-letter network, ESPN, and secure a guy that is the first consensus 5-star player South Carolina has ever signed that was not from the state of South Carolina?
Well, Keith, as I've said before, I think regardless of what was going to happen on that first Wednesday in February, South Carolina had a very good recruiting class. I don't think it was going to take anything away from what they were able to accomplish. I mean, they were able to, bring in 50% blue chip players. I mean, that hasn't happened in nearly a decade. So I bring that up because I think all in all, the recruiting class as a whole, I know being able to land Harbor as we have over on 3, we have them ranked 16th nationally. That's 12 spots up for this year's recruiting class in comparison to the 2022 recruiting class. But I think regardless, they were still going to have a very, very strong class. Now, being able to land Harbor, I think it does a couple things. I think, one, it grabs the attention from a national standpoint. I think locally, Shane Beamer and this coaching staff has done a tremendous job of recruiting in-state. And that's not to say they haven't done a good job out of state, but they've done a really good job. You look at this year, you look at next year, and the seeds that they're already planning for the class of 2024, just some of the top talent. And I'm not going to sit here compare to Clemson. Look, bottom line is this. Although Clemson is not maybe where they were, say, 5-10 years ago, I'm not going to go as far to say that they're done in terms of being who they are right now. They're still Clemson. You're still trying to get to a level like that so you can recruit nationally as they've been able to do and obviously achieve so many great things over the last decade. I say that, though, Keith, because being able to land a guy like Harbor, it changes that perception. It's going to grab people's attention that maybe aren't familiar with Shane Beamer in the program, or maybe they've just been seeing some of the things over the last couple months. They'll win against Tennessee. They'll win at Clemson. And now they're going to say, And even if it just grabs their attention just a little bit, that could be enough to be able to reel someone in. So I think just more than anything, it's going to put other prospects out there on notice as to saying, hey, look, South Carolina, all right, you know what? They had 8 wins last year, but Nyckoles Harbor thinks something special is over there. And, of course, we could combine the track and field, but it's not just Harbor. You're looking at some very talented 4-stars that are coming in too. So, again, I think it just changes that perception. The other thing, too, that DMV area, my goodness, they have done a tremendous, tremendous job of being able to go up there. That is not an easy area to recruit because you're also competing against, the ACC, but you're competing against Big Ten schools too. So to be able to go up there and be able to create a pipeline similar to what we saw with Spurrier in the state of Florida. And obviously Beamer's done a good job in the state of Florida as well, especially this past recruiting class. But I think being able to go into that area in particular, and as we saw yesterday on 3, Dylan Stewart, number 1 athlete or number 1 player in the country, he's from that DMV area. I think it just speaks volumes of the potential growth they can continue to have from recruiting up in that area.
Mike, no doubt about it. I was just getting to go to Dylan Stewart, who has gone on record as saying the Gamecocks are the leaders for him. He is at Friendship Christian Academy, I believe, in the Washington, D.C. area, 6'5", 230, an elite edge rusher. You had him. He's been down for a junior day. Big Mike Williams, who played with Desmond Umeozulu last year, 6'7", 315, just a monster offensive lineman. And then top 100 cornerback Braden Lee. They documented their junior day journey down to South Carolina. It looks like all of those guys are coming back for spring. And, hey, when you are going toe-to-toe for guys like Nyckoles Harbor and now Dylan Stewart, who's the number 1 ranked player in the country, Alabama, Ohio State, Southern Cal, Texas, Oklahoma, you name it. All the blue bloods in college football are going to want this guy. For South Carolina to be in pole position this early and to have all those other guys like the Big Tree, Tosin Babalade, Desmond Umeozulu, Nyckoles Harbor, Zabari Sandy, those guys. Not only Shane Beamer, who's recruited that area his entire career, and Torian Gray, who was his teammate at Virginia Tech, and Sterling Lucas, who is a rising star, it appears in recruiting, has done a magnificent job up there. May have been the guy that, outside of Shane Beamer, that really helped close the deal on Nyckoles Harbor. I think South Carolina is really tapping into a very fertile recruiting ground, particularly, and I do think they're going to break through in North Carolina this year, but Mack Brown historically has essentially put a fence up around that state. Supplementing from the DMV, I think, is critical for South Carolina's success. And, man, they've got some big-time guys coming in already from that part of the country.
Yeah, and again, Keith, you look at it. I've had these conversations with the Shaq Wilsons of the world, the Steven Garcias, when we were talking about Florida. These guys, even if they didn't compete against each other in high school, they're familiar with each other, right? Maybe they're going to different camps in that area or maybe throughout the country, and they run into each other, and there's just a special bond. So when you have guys from the same area, they can relate to each other. Again, might not be the same neighborhood, might not be the same school, might not be the same conference, but there's something to be said. I mean, shoot, I only played Division II football, but all the New Jersey guys in the locker room, you would have thought we were, between the New Yorkers and the New Jersey guys, it was kind of like a Bronx Teal. I mean, they all stick together. So I bring that up because you kind of do have these little cliques, if you will, when you go out and you play college football, if you're from the same area. You take pride in that. So I think being able to say, hey, look, Nyckoles Harbor, I mean, that's not just the name that people are knowing throughout this country when it comes to recruiting for football and obviously track as well, and track and field. But from the D.C. area, from that DMV area, I am sure a kid like Dylan Stewart, I'm sure there's so many talented athletes in that area that know exactly who Harbor is. And I'm not saying they're necessarily friends. I'm not necessarily saying they look up to him. They got a poster of Harbor in their room. But what I'm trying to get at is they know who that kid is, and they know how talented he is. And obviously we're using Harbor for example, but it just kind of sets the precedent of, hey, I know what that kid is capable of doing. I know how talented he is, and he's choosing to go to South Carolina. There has to be a reason why he's going there. I want to find out. And look, if that's what they need to do from a recruiting standpoint, to be able to get player A, player B in the building, to look around in that ops building and say, wow, this is something special, that's great. But I think more importantly, just being able to talk to those coaches. I think Beamer, the way he's doing it, I shared this about a month ago in an interview I did with Dante Reno on Gamecock Central, that Reno said that Beamer was the only coach in the country that not only called and reached out to his mother on Mother's Day last year, but the fact that he was a head coach and did that. So it just shows you, again, not to try to, give away the secrets in the kitchen, but it just goes to show you the little things that Beamer and this coaching staff are doing when you keep hearing, oh, they're authentic, they're genuine. No, it's the truth. And not just the players, but the families are resonating with it as well.
I mean, no doubt about it. Shane Beamer gets it in recruiting. You see it already in this 2024 class. And by the way, thanks to you, I've had the opportunity to interview Dante Reno, and man, that guy, he sounds like a college professor when you talk to him. I mean, he is wise beyond his years. He's helping to spearhead this class. You've got him. You've got Cam Pringle, the number one offensive tackle in the country. You got Michael Smith, who acquitted himself very well at that Atlanta Under Armour camp. I mean, you got Wendell Gregory, one of the top linebackers in the country. You got Mazio Bennett. You could be getting ready to add his teammate Blake Franks. It looks like the Gamecocks are still in great shape for Josiah Thompson, who some college staffs think he's the number one offensive tackle in the country. So, I mean, you could end up with the top two offensive tackles in the country to stack on top of what on paper is probably the best offensive line class in Gamecock football history. And so that's important. The offensive line is important. Dowell Loggains says it all starts there. But, Mike, when Spencer Rattler on December the 13th of 2021, when it was announced he and Austin Stogner were coming to South Carolina, and it basically broke Gamecock Twitter, and South Carolina was trending for about 48 hours. Not very many people expected Spencer Rattler would be back for a second season. Spencer Rattler's back. Juice Wells, who is one of the top wide receivers in the SEC, and if Marcus Satterfield hadn't forgot about him for a few weeks in the game plan, he probably would have been the leading receiver in the Southeastern Conference. What is the impact of having two veteran guys and two big-time playmakers coming back for this 23 team, which is going to have expectations because those guys are coming back?
Well, I'm going to take it a step further too, Keith. I also want to throw into Kerryon Joyner in there because, again, regardless of what he's able to do or what they have him do from a athletic standpoint, right, asking him maybe to be a receiver or running back or whatever the case may be, return on special teams, I think being able to have his voice in that locker room as well as a guy like Luke Doty as well, I think being able to have guys like that, you really can't put a price on it. You really, really can. And congratulations to Kerryon and his girlfriend on the delivery of their baby girl the other day. So congratulations to them. But to go back to talk about Spencer and Juice in particular, I think it brings excitement. It brings excitement for some of these other guys out there because, look, once we get into spring football, there's going to be guys in this roster, just like there's going to be across the country. There's going to be guys that are going to enter the portal. It's inevitable. It's inevitable because players right now at this time of the year, they have expectations for themselves. They have expectations of what their role is going to be. That's not new at South Carolina. That's not new in college football. The difference now in comparison to, say, 5-10 years ago is the transfer portal. And there's that second window. We had a 45-day window from December to January. Now we're going to have a 15-day window coming up. Once players find out, they go through the process, they've had their end-of-the-year meetings with their coaches, they have in their mind, okay, this is what I have to do. This is what my positional coach is telling me to do. This is what the head coach is telling me to do. This is what my coordinator is telling me to do. Spring football might not necessarily go that way for them. And for some of them, they might decide they want to go somewhere else. I say that because having a guy like Rattler, having a guy like Juice, it brings, again, that excitement to say, I could have the opportunity to play with those guys. Now, I'm not saying South Carolina necessarily is looking at another wide receiver or tight end. As we all know, that room is very crowded right now. But it could be that running back spot, right? I mean, you have a running back room right now where, as much as I love Juju McDowell, he hasn't been asked to be the guy the first 2 years, right? And again, that's just based on who was in front of him. You know, the Kevin Harris's of the world, Marshawn Lloyd, right? I mean, we can go down the list. Is he the type of guy, though, that can go out there and get 20-plus carries a game? I don't think that's necessarily his style. That's his game. I think he's very talented also as a receiver in terms of just coming out, being able to make some catches out of the backfield. You can ask him to play slot as well. He's just so dang shifty. You want to get him the ball out in space. And I feel like it would kind of be dumb to give him the ball 25-plus times as a running back. So, again, I bring those things up. You have obviously some new running backs, Mario Anderson coming in. You also have some guys that were already there before, right? So Lavassier Carroll, I know that was a name that a lot of fans wanted to see more of last season. So, again, I'm not going to be shocked to see USC pick up a skill position guy, whether that be running back, whether that be wide receiver, could be a defensive guy. But in this case, talking strictly about offense, because of those two guys being back, because Rattler and Juice are going to be back. And I also think, too, Keith, being able to have a new offensive coordinator when you have veterans back there, if things hit the fan early on, right, if it becomes a little bit bumpy, because it's a tough schedule, there's going to be some type of transition. There's going to be some type of growing pain. And with an offensive line where you lost over 50% of your starting snaps from a year ago, there's going to be changes. And you need to be able to adapt to that. And yes, there's guys coming back from last year's team that have experience of starting on the offensive line, but they haven't worked as a cohesive unit before. So how quickly can you get them to adjust? And if there are those challenges, the speed bumps, the growing pains early on, having a guy like Rattler say, hey, guys, look, it's all right. We've gone through this before. Look back to last year, okay? Everything's going to be fine. It can help speed up that process and bring that reassurance a little bit more in comparison to having a younger quarterback or a quarterback that has less experience as a starter.
No doubt. So in the morning, you guys are going to meet 9 of the 11 transfer players that are in. 8.
Thanks for reminding me, Keith. No sleeping in tonight.
Yeah.
Or tomorrow. I can't even remember what day it is. Yeah, it's Wednesday, isn't it? I thought it was Tuesday for a second.
So 8:45, big Sidney Fugar. He starts it off. It's a 15-minute car wash. They're rolling all 8 of the scholarship guys and former 5-star walk-on D'Angelo Gibbs, who went to Georgia, who we thought may be a wide receiver. Now he's going to be a defensive back. He will be in. The only 2 guys they won't meet is big Lucas Vonza, the tight end from IMG, who I think's from Finland, and Maurice Brown III, who's a very impressive-looking athlete from the DMV, who chose to come to South Carolina as a preferred walk-on. And so, Mike, out of these guys, who really catches your eye as, maybe the guys that you think could be the biggest impact players on this team because they are older guys? Several of these guys have been multiple-year starters. Some are coming from other SEC programs. Some are at positions of need. Drill it down for us and give us the guys in your mind heading into spring practice that you are really going to be paying attention to as guys that could come out of spring either starting or a guy that, hey, this guy can be a real player in the fall.
Well, I think it starts with a position that might not be the sexiest, but it's, number one, a position of need, and in my opinion, the most important in terms of being able to get things heading in the right direction, not just with the offense, but specifically about the offensive line, and that's Nick Argiulo, the transfer offensive lineman from Yale. Not only was he the only captain at Yale, and as you mentioned, Reno before, having a chance to play for his father, Tony Reno, and just hearing about him and just hearing the positive things that are coming out. I mean, the other night, he was finishing towards the beginning when it came to all the offensive linemen. Like, that kid is moving. Right now, he is projected to be the starting center. He has experience of playing other positions on the offensive line, but knowing that you're losing a center that had been there for freaking years, all right, you need to be able to find a way to be able to get a center in there and be able to get that, again, comfortability, that experience of someone that understands what it's like to play multiple positions on that offensive line. He's going to be able to help other guys out, and it's going to be a huge help because, outside of the fact that we've been told he's got a strong football IQ, well, he comes from Yale as well. All right. So he's a smart kid. He should be able to help out some of the other guys and get them, in positions to be able to help them out and feel more comfortable about everything. So that's where I start first and foremost. I think another position, or another guy, I should say, is Eddie Lewis. Eddie Lewis, the more we hear about Eddie, the more I feel like he could be a guy that, I don't like comparing guys, but I mean, you lose a guy like Josh Vann, and you think about too some of the things that he can do on special teams, and a guy like Lewis. I think he's a guy that can fit into this system quickly and right away. I don't want to go as far as saying, all right, he's going to be the next Juice Wells. When Juice came in, the amount of coaches that reached out to me from the FCS level, and I was just drooling over the fact of what this kid could be, and we saw a lot of that. I'm not saying it's going to be quite like that, but this kid has speed. And just like anything in life, how quickly can they pick up the playbook, right? Obviously with him having experience of playing at the FBS level, he might have a an advantage over some of these other guys that are coming in, like a Mario Anderson, right? Mario Anderson, I think he could be a very fun running back for USC. Fun guy to watch. Big size. He's going to be asked to do things, though, that maybe he wasn't necessarily asked to do at the Division II level. That doesn't mean he can't pick it up. Go look back at the last couple of years of the Division II guys that have come through here. Jalen Brooks, when he was on the field, he was able to do some good things, especially this past year. Go back to last year. Carlin Splitzelli started the last 6-7 games at nickel, and he's with the Steelers right now. Beamer has an eye for bringing in Division II guys, and I'm not going to be shocked one bit to see Mario Anderson go out there and find a role. I think that's what it comes down to. Find a role. Let's not get this misconstrued. Like, no, Mike Uva is not saying he's going to be the next Marcus Lattimore or the next George Rogers or, he's about Kevin Harris. He's going to be able to make an impact and do something that your team needs right now, especially after losing a guy like Marshawn Lloyd. You need to have extra guys in that backfield because South Carolina is not afraid to roll out 2-3 running backs, sometimes even 4, if they feel like that's going to put them in the best position to succeed. On the flip side of that, though, Keith, as you know, there's a new offensive coordinator. So Dowell Loggains could be a little bit different, but I think just where college football is right now, and even in the NFL, it's usually by committee now. You're not seeing a guy get 30, 40 touches anymore. I mean, there could be guys out there. There's always going to be the outlier or two, but I feel like we'll continue to see by committee when it comes to this running back group at South Carolina this season.
No doubt. One guy that I would add that Dowell Loggains and Justin Stepp are very familiar with, Trey Knox.
Yep.
The tight end, former wide receiver, tight end now from Arkansas. I think he's an immediate starter. I continue to hear great things about Joshua Simon, the kid from Dalzell who come in from Western Kentucky. So I'm right on with you. And so I think if we put Nick Gargiulo at center, I think you could be looking at, from left to right, Jalen Nichols, who was your left tackle, Ja'Kai Moore, who was your left guard at the end of the season when you were very productive, Gargiulo at center. Then at right guard, you probably got a battle with Vershawn Lee, who started much of the season last year, and Trey Jones, who's a guy they're very high on. And then at right tackle, you got Tyshawn Wanamaker, who's played a lot of football. And then you've got a very talented redshirt freshman in Kason Henry, who battled it out during bowl practice. And I didn't even mention several other guys, not to mention, I think about the third-ranked guy in the class, Marquis Anderson from Dorman. He's on campus. We'll see how he does. And so for me, the high school guys that have enrolled, I think the defense, they need players. They lost guys on all 3 levels. They need guys. For me, every conversation starts with Grayson Pup Howard. You heard last summer, hey, watch out for this Nick Eamon-Worry guy. Man, he is a workout warrior. He's killing it on the field. He's just got that it factor. I'm hearing the same things about Pup Howard, who, by the way, is no longer 6'3", 215. He's 6'4", 242 pounds. Okay, that's pretty big for an SEC linebacker. Then there's this kid from Eatonton, Georgia, named Jalen Kilgore, 6'1", 207, who's an elite wide receiver and a big-time thumper at safety. And Mike Venables at Oklahoma, he had this guy as maybe the top safety on their board. And when you fly from Norman, Oklahoma into Augusta, Georgia, you fly over some pretty talent-rich states that are full of safeties like Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. I think this kid is big time. Xavier McLeod, who somehow beat out Lenore Sellers for Mr. Football, 6'5", 320. There's a reason Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp recruited that guy all the way to the end. I think he's a prototypical nose guard. And I think, quite frankly, he's a guy that will need to be pushed. But the upside is higher than Zach Pickens, in my opinion. And then I look at the JUCO, Elijah Davis, a guy that could play end or could play tackle. I think South Carolina has really helped themselves, and to throw in a defensive transfer, linebacker Jaron Willis from Ole Miss, 6'2", 235, who played safety, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, and rushed off the edge at Lee County High School. I think all of these guys on defense are going to have an opportunity to work their way into the depth chart during spring practice.
No question about it, Keith. And I think, look, they're losing some very talented guys up front. We actually just wrote a piece that just came out probably 5 minutes ago on Gamecock Central. It's a guide to the NFL Combine, the 5 Gamecocks that are out there, what you can expect, and when you can watch them, all that kind of fun stuff, and what their week's going to be like. So head on over to Gamecock Central and check that out. But, being able also having Jordan Strawn back, which they're expected to have, that adds another layer too. Now, here's the thing about Strawn. I was very, very high on him going into last season. We did our preseason predictions. I had him leading the team in sacks. Unfortunately, as we all know, he went down with an ACL injury at the beginning of the season. I say all that because with him coming back, again, expecting that everything does go as smoothly as we've been told it has, and that he will get that extra year, which it appears to be the case. Those lower body injuries, especially when it comes to an ankle, knee, foot, whatever the case may be, it's really difficult to say, all right, this is what that player is going to look like after that, especially that year returning from that injury, right? Again, these guys are offensive players, but a guy like Nick Muse, even Luke Doty, Marshawn Lloyd, like you think of just in terms of the most recent players in the most recent years, some of the injuries South Carolina has seen with lower body injuries. That following year, they're usually not themselves yet. And it's not even about a physical standpoint. It's usually that mental hurdle. Can Jordan Strawn overcome that? Because as we've seen, a guy like Muse, right? Doty will be going into that following year, this upcoming year. Marshawn Lloyd, once they get over that initial year, that mental hurdle, the sky's the limit. With Jordan, unfortunately, this is it. So I understand from a defensive standpoint what he's going to be asked to do in comparison to maybe a receiver. It's a little bit different, but still he's going to be making a lot of cuts. So I bring that up because anything that Jordan Strawn does this year, to me, is just the cherry on top. I'm not holding my breath for him to do, the things that I was expecting him to do this past season. But anything that he's able to do is going to be a bonus. And hopefully he's able to come out there, overcome that mental hurdle. We've seen guys do that before, but it's not easy. And I just say that when people look at his name, don't instantly just assume, all right, that's the same player that you're going to get as you had going into last year. Hopefully he's able to overcome that mental hurdle. It's just tough. Some guys say they feel like, oh yeah, I've overcome. Until they're out there, though, making those cuts for the first couple times, you're compensating everything you're doing with that, in this case, that knee. So I hope he's able to find a way to get over that hurdle because, man, he is such a talented player. He's a lot of fun to watch. And, I'm excited to see him play at that next level. But, of course, he needs to be able to prove to people that he's the type of player still as he was before he got hurt.
No doubt. So we could say the same about Mo Kaba, but
yep.
Hey, let's look at, my man number 44, Sherrod Green last year. It took him a couple games, right, to kind of get going. And I was just wondering if he was going to have to be on a pitch count all year because of just how many season-ending injuries he had had. And he held up and had a great year. Now, to to be determined whether Strong and Kaba can do that. But when you look at Sherrod Green and what he was able to do, I do think that does give you, a little bit of hope. But I'm with you. I mean, you got to temper the expectations because it's just not the same coming off that ACL injury. It takes time to get back. I do think for South Carolina, Desmond Umeozulu has to have a huge spring. Fair or unfair, he's uber talented. He turned down Ohio State to come to South Carolina. He's 6'6", 240. He may have to play. Tonka Hemingway, Elijah Davis, one or both of those guys, they're probably going to have to play some defensive end this year. That's just the way it's going to roll. We don't know what the status of a guy like Montague Rames is going to be for this year because of what happened earlier. And there is that May transfer portal period. I do think South Carolina, needs another running back. As critical of a spring as it is for Super Mario, I've heard great things about him. Okay, it's also huge for Lavassier Carroll because this is a big guy that is a talented guy. He was a top 60 player in the country, a guy that went to IMG Academy. You watched him on the film. Not only did you see the ability to just stick the foot in the ground and accelerate and go, but also the ball skills out of the backfield. And a bigger guy at 6'2", 200-plus pounds that is capable of taking on 15 to 20 carries maybe between the tackles. I think it's critical for him, and then we'll see what happens in the portal in May. And so last question. Obviously, Marcus Satterfield out, Dowell Loggains in. We hadn't seen him or heard a lot from him. I did think he won the press conference. I do think he's eminently more qualified to run the offense at South Carolina than the former guy. I like what he talked about using matchups, about using not just the verticality of the field, but the 53 and the third, the hash marks of college football versus the NFL, and getting your guys out in space in one-on-one matchups where they can make plays. What are you looking forward to from seeing from Dowell Loggains in spring practice?
I think, again, more so just the offensive line, how quickly they can be able to pick things up. And we don't know, at least I don't know if they're going to be going back to a man blocking scheme. I think I'm kind of assuming that they will. When I say that doesn't mean that they won't use any zone blocking concepts. But the reason I bring that up is because when Satterfield came in, the offensive line really, really struggled to adjust to a zone blocking scheme. And I know there's going to be some people out there that will say, well, why aren't they learning that at the high school level? Some guys do. But again, going back to the whole offensive line, it's kind of like living in a home, right? I mean, you have 5 people living in a house. Everyone has to be pulling their own weight. If they're not, and one person isn't doing what they're supposed to, it's going to throw off everything. And obviously, there's much more to zone blocking than just the offensive line. The quarterback got to identify the mic pre-snap. Tight ends got to do their responsibilities. Running backs got to pick up blockers as well. But with that being said, I think how can they get the offensive line to getting sync as quickly as possible? And that starts with Dowell and being able to not just pick those 5 guys that will be your starting offensive linemen, but being able to get them to a point where Rattler feels comfortable. I think Rattler is going to be feeling more comfortable regardless. I think going into it, I don't want to use the word naive, but it was going to be different. And maybe at first it was one of those things where it was just going to be like, hey, all right, we'll see how we can adjust to this. I'm capable of doing these things, but the offensive line, they had their struggles at the beginning of the year. And it wasn't just the offensive line. I mean, tight ends missed some blocking assignments, running backs missed some blocking assignments as well. And then eventually they were able to figure things out as the year went on. How do you, again, shorten that that period of time where there is going to be a learning curve? How do you speed that process up so that you're not going to have to worry about, okay, it's going to take until like game 3, game 4 until everyone's feeling comfortable. I mean, there's going to be adjustments each week. I mean, it's freaking football. We're playing in the SEC here, right? So I just think that's where it starts. But outside of that, just how he utilizes the talent, I think, unfortunately for Dell, and it's unfortunate for Satterfield too, it's kind of like an ex-girlfriend in a sense. Like you're going to look at Dell and you're going to be kind of thinking, all right, what can he do better than the person that was previously here? And there's going to be things, I'm sure, that Gamecock fans, as much as they don't want to publicly admit it, they'll be like, man, there were some good things that Satterfield was able to do. You just hope that list is not that long. You just hope that list is not that long. Because I do think Satterfield did some good things. Unfortunately, as we said many, many times on this program, Keith, it just wasn't consistent enough. So, again, what can Dowell come in here and limit that list, number one, by being able to do things that this offense just wasn't able to do on a consistent basis last year. And some of that right now is going to be difficult because who knows what that running back will truly look like come week 1. As I always phrase it, you have some unproven talent in terms of depth at that running back room. On the offensive line, you have some unproven depth at the offensive line position. Wide receivers, I feel like there's some talented guys in there. I think there's guys that are going to be slept on that can make a big impact. And then tight end, that room is loaded. Don't be surprised to see a lot of 2 tight end sets this year.
I agree. So last question, partly Dowell Loggains related.
Yep.
Okay, Justin Stepp turns down Sunbelt Billy. They work together at Clemson. He is staying home at South Carolina. And so now he is tasked, along with Dowell Loggains, from transforming Nyckoles Harbor, the track star and the 5-star recruit, into a player that can produce in year 1. What are the realistic expectations, in your opinion, for Nyckoles Harbor, who On3's director of scouting, Charles Power, said, he blew their expectations out of the water at the week of the Under Armour game. I do believe this is a guy, and it's no knock against my guys from here in the USA, but I've coached players from different continents, from Europe and Africa. And for whatever reason, there are some differences. Now, there are guys like a Ray Lewis that's the most intense human being on the face of the planet, that never took a playoff, that maximized his talent. But in the world in which we live today, with the transfer portal and social media and everything else, a lot of kids get caught in that. I mean, when your dad works for NASA, when your aspiration is to be the first pick in the National Football League draft, to run in the Paris Olympics, and to become an orthopedic surgeon, it's a little bit different than your typical high school Harry coming into a Division I program. And so what are the expectations for Dowell Loggains, who is in charge of that offense? He is the architect. He will make the blueprints. And then Justin Stepp, who has proven he can get the most out of his guys. What are you expecting from Nyckoles Harbor in year 1?
Don't force it. Young player coming in, and it's not like he's playing running back where you just give him the ball and say, hey, go run, kid. And I'm not saying it's that simple, right? Obviously, you need vision. You need to be able to figure out when lanes close and all that kind of stuff. I bring this up because he is an absolute freak of an athlete. There's no question about it. But at the end of the day, he's making the jump from high school to the SEC. There's going to be a learning curve. So what can you do to make him feel comfortable in that and you don't discourage his confidence. Now, he seems like you mentioned, he went down the brief resume. I'm sure he's been at some point in his life challenged in some shape, way, or form where things haven't gone as sunshine and rainbow as it may seem, right? I mean, it seems like people are going to be like, oh, he's a 5-star. Everything's been easy for him.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago in that track meet when he ran against a bunch of grown-ass men.
Correct. So I bring that up because the biggest fear I have sometimes with young players coming out, especially when it comes to football, is losing their confidence too early, because you throw them into a situation and they have that weight of the world on their shoulders. I mean, it's not the exact same, but Gigi Jackson went through a period of time with that, and it was a lot for him. And as we saw, he handled it in a very, very poor manner. And as a result, it led him to be coming off the bench for a couple games. Now he's been able to bounce back from it. He's been able to mature, and that's a different story for another day. But comparing the two, it's important to be able to make sure that you just don't throw a player out there and you just expect them. And I'm sure, I mean, again, it's football. It's not the same as baseball or basketball, soccer, whatever the heck, whatever sport you want to say. The speed of the game is going to be faster. The players are going to be much bigger and stronger. You need to be able to make sure that you are, number one, you know what the hell you're doing out there, right? So you're not thinking. You're just going out there and you're able to react. He was able to do that at high school, right? And that's not to say he was not a smart player. I'm sure he was able to pick up the playbook just fine, but high school playbooks aren't the same as college. So how quickly can he pick that up? And if they want him to play, and we could say receiver, tight end. I mean, again, it's more so just, I look at the tight end position as a hybrid position anyway these days. If he's being asked to play some tight end, he might have to know a little bit more about with the blocking assignments, right? But I think more than anything is just, he's got a tremendous wide receiver coach in Justin Stepp, and just being able to fine tune your route running so that you can do the things that you're capable of doing at a very elite level. Because again, that's not to say that he wasn't doing things at a high level in high school, but let's face it, when you're that talented, you're able to get away with some things sometimes, right? I mean, you might be able to round off a route. And I'm not saying, I mean, I don't have the footage in front of me. I'm not going to go, play by play. This is just talking in terms of, general terms when you're talking about high school players coming out. So I think more so is just fine tuning his abilities so that you can get that elite-ism out of him, while also making sure that you don't ruin his confidence. I think that's very important, because if you lose his confidence early on, and that's not to say that he can't bounce back, but it's just going to slow the process down. I've seen it before. I've seen it with teammates. I've seen it with other college athletes that I've covered over the years, especially when it comes to football. That is a real thing. And if you put yourself in a situation where you're just throwing a guy out there and their confidence just gets knocked down early on, especially as a freshman, sometimes it can take more than just the season to be able to get it back. So to get back to just what I expect to see from him, I expect to see USC gradually use him early on in the season. Maybe you'll see him play a little bit more against some of those lower competition schools, right? But obviously it picks up quickly, because then you got to go play at Georgia. I think as the middle of the season comes, I think this is a guy that you could see being used out there a good bit. I'm not saying a starter necessarily, because again, I think that's just too much just to put on a kid before we actually see him out there in the system. And the other part about it, Keith, guess what? When you're not the quarterback, when you're not the running back, you have to worry about other players around you. How's the offensive line going to react? Are they going to be able to keep Rattler upright? Right? Because if not, what happens? Well, maybe we have to throw an extra tight end out there. Maybe we have to put 2 running backs out there. We've saw that at times, right? And there's less opportunities for receivers to be out there on the field. So, again, it comes down to a lot of factors, but in terms of what Harbor can control, just try to pick up the playbook as quickly as you can. Listen to those coaches. You have a tremendous, tremendous wide receiver coach in Justin Stepp, and Dowell Loggains understands what it's like to be able to coach at the NFL and college level. I think he's going to be able to do a tremendous job of being able to talk to him in a manner in which he's going to be able to get the most out of him. That's something that Alshon Jeffrey told me, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, that's something that he really appreciated about Dowell, is that he's very direct. He's going to tell you exactly how it is. You might not necessarily want to hear it, but he's going to be very direct with you. He's not going to sugarcoat stuff. He's not going to say, bless your heart, and then after you leave, start calling you a mother effer. You know, he's going to be kind of like that northerner that in terms of coaching, I think that's the way to go.
I agree. I mean, I can't wait to see it. So a few weeks ago, we had Mr. SEC Stat Cat on. He said the number one thing, and Mike, you know, I bitched about this all season long. We talked about it. They never moved Spencer Rattler out of the pocket. His time at Oklahoma, he was at his best when the pocket was moved. He was on a rollout, a bootleg, a waggle. I mean, we saw that throw to Xavier Legette that basically was a 55-yard rope that I think knocked him down in the end zone, that hit him right between the 1 and the 7 he couldn't hold on to. But that is the most elite quality of Spencer Rattler as a passer, is when you move him from the pocket. That is certainly something I'm looking forward to seeing Dowell Loggains doing with him. Because, I mean, we saw it at the end of the season. That throw to Juice Wells in the Clemson game, that thing was just a thing of beauty. And I think with Wells coming back, with Amarian Brown, with DeKarian Joyner, with some of the young guys that are coming in this receiver room, and then a guy with elite speed like Nyckoles Harbor, getting Rattler outside the pocket where he's not, you know, faced with these 6'6", 300-pound dudes with their arms up coming at him, he's going to have a chance to make some plays down the field this season.
No question about it. And it's going to be exciting, Keith. You know, I think when you talk about the expectations this year, I think last year there were some people that their expectations were a little too high. And I'm not trying to be the wet blanket in the room here. But I think realistically, the expectations based on where they were 2 years ago in comparison to where they are right now, everything's gone up a little bit. I'm not ready to say that South Carolina is going to win an SEC East championship this year. I think that gap between Georgia and the rest of the SEC East is still very large. So I say that because I think realistically what the expectations should be for fans, I'm not saying the team, right? Team's obviously going to be aiming for national championship. I get that, okay? But in terms of outside, just looking at it, I think the realistic expectations should be to finish second in the SEC East. You beat Tennessee last year. They finished ahead of you. The reason why they finished ahead of you is because you weren't consistent in some of those games that you should have been able to win. The Missouris of the world, you didn't show up offensively. The Floridas of the world, you didn't show up that game offensively. If you do that, you finish second in the East. You finish second in the East. And then the conversation can be a little bit different this offseason in comparison to what I'm saying right now. But in order to go, and I'm not saying you have to go from step 4 to step 3 to step 2 to step, no. Okay? But realistically, based on where Georgia is right now, I know you want to finish. I know you want, and I'm not saying that they're not capable of being able to shock the world. But I think realistically, you need to be able to finish second first. And then you can have those conversations.
No doubt about it. Mike, man, I can't thank you enough for being on with us today, for, you know, your continued support of the podcast and coming on for the last 3 years. Be well, my friend. We'll look forward to catching up with you again real soon. Keep doing great work. You're killing it over there. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Appreciate you, Keith. Always a pleasure, buddy.
All right. Take care. All right. That is TMIek Uva from Gamecock Central. All right. Hey, we had some comments today in the Nana's chat box. Nana's Porch, full service catering company in the greater Charlotte area, whether it's banquets, corporate events, golf tournaments, weddings. They can even roll out the whole hog barbecue for the big splash. You name it, Nana's Porch can do it. They were voted top 3 for food trailers by the local newspaper, and their pimento cheese was voted number 1 in cheese products in the meat and cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Food Association. Check them out at nanasporch.com. That's NANAS Porch, PORCH.com. My good friend Chris Payne, appreciate him sponsoring the chat box. Guys, get those questions in. All right, so what a great show today on Gamecock Pod Live. Emily Adams bringing it. Mike Uva, great stuff on Gamecock football. We love it. Let's face it, Gamecock football drives the bus and recruiting. Hale McGranahan, that dude was in Atlanta at the Under Armour camp. He's throwing up updates, he and Alex Jones, every day up there. I think the Gamecocks are going to make a clean sweep of the top prospects in the state. And oh, by the way, one guy I didn't mention, Lenore Sellers, 6'3", 232 pounds, 4.41 seconds in the 40. I've heard he's been the second best quarterback on campus since the day he set foot on campus. And I think that just continues to bode well for Dowell Loggains for the future of the Gamecock offense, with guys like Mazio Bennett coming in, with Kelton Henderson, CJ Adams, Tyshawn Russell, maybe even Vakari Swain. The tight end room is restocked and it's going to be really good. And I think Justin Stepp is going to get some more big-time dudes at the wide receiver position. All right. So for Emily Adams and Mike Uva, this is Keith Alsep. This has been Gamecock Pod Live. Thanks for tuning in. If you missed it, send all your friends to our YouTube page. It will be up. It will also be up in podcast form. We'll put it up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. This show is absolutely free. We'll be back tomorrow on the show with Sumter and Bryce from Gamecock Basketball Only Podcast, talking hoops on the eve of South Carolina's first game in the SEC Tournament. So until tomorrow, this is Keith Alsep, and this has been Gamecock Pod Live, episode number 1167 of Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live. I am out of here. God bless and go Gamecocks.